It's great to see the Ironman World Champs return to Kona in Hawaii on the weekend. Some amazing results, particularly the professional field, some unbelievable performances. But I made yet again the same observation I make every year. Kona breaks athletes. I think most of us would agree when we say Kona is probably the most difficult endurance race in the world. Definitely the most difficult triathlon, and obviously it is the holy grail when it comes to Ironman Tri. But I would argue the most grueling endurance race because of a number of different factors. Obviously Ironman's hard enough. 3.8k swim, 180 bike and a marathon. We're all across that. It's a difficult race to begin with. We're out there for 7, 8, 9, 10, 14 hours, however long it takes you. But there's a number of different factors as to why athletes go through the season, have a great year, qualify for Kona, and it's all going so well, and then on race day it absolutely falls apart. What are the contributing aspects or components that cause an athlete to just fall apart? We could have the best preparation we like, but more often than not, I see and I hear and I observe athletes really have a pretty bad day when it comes to racing at Kona. Let's start with the first and really obvious one, which is the environmental conditions. They're a little bit unique, a little bit different to anything else you might experience around the world. There is a couple of races that might be similar, but very rare you're gonna get an Ironman where it's 30 plus degrees pretty much the entire race. Like, it's gonna be hot in the morning. When you start, you jump in, it's already gonna be pretty warm. It's also incredibly humid. We're talking 60, 65, potentially up as high as sort of 70 or 80% humidity. That's really gonna cause some havoc from a physiological sense. Now, what are the different factors that impacted by high heat, high humidity? Well, when we're talking about exercise, the first thing we have to consider is all of our normal responses. So what our normal heart rate is, what our normal oxygen uptake is, even something like as simple as our sweat rate, everything's gonna elevate because we're overcoming that additional stress on our core temperature. Body wants to stay at what we call homeostasis or keep things the same. Elevations in core body temperature are gonna cause our systems internally to want to shut down to protect themselves. Now, when we go and put ourselves in a high heat environment, something like Kona, 30 plus degrees, long exposure in the heat all day, things like heart rate are going to increase. We're trying to circulate more blood around the system to be able to get blood to the surface of the skin to release heat as radiation or get the heat away from us. But more importantly, get the blood up to the surface so we can release blood plasma as sweat, that fluid we see come on the outside of our skin and help cool us down. Our evaporative cooling mechanism is our most effective. It helps us release about 80% of our heat during exercise. So in hot conditions, this is going to be really, really critical. We need to be able to monitor that and cool ourselves down to keep us at that homeostasis level we want to see. But the thing is with heat, it's tricky enough. You combine it with humidity, becomes really difficult. So we've already got elevated heart rate, we've already got elevated sweat rate. Hot conditions as well, it's gonna play havoc with our fuel utilization and increases our oxygen uptake because we're overworking to try and keep things the same. We're working harder than we need to cool ourselves down, but also because it is hot and we're under stress already, we're also then working harder than what we need to just to sustain the intensity we're trying to in a race circumstance. All of these things are starting to get away from us. You add in the humidity, it becomes even harder. That evaporative cooling mechanism can't work as effective as it was before. Essentially, how our evaporative cooling works is fluid gets onto the skin, it releases into the atmosphere as a gas, and it takes the heat with it. But it's only going to move from high to low concentration really effectively. High concentration on the surface of the skin, low concentration when the heat is dry heat, low humidity, it's going to release in the atmosphere. We go to Hawaii, pump up the tropical environment, pump up the humidity. What does that do? More moisture in the air makes it difficult for that heat to release with the fluid. Like, it just gets trapped on you. You feel it sticky, it gets stuck. Ultimately, that causes us to continue to heat up. We keep sweating, but it's not cooling us down. We continue to heat up. Things start to get away from us. Realistically, heat and humidity play one of the biggest factors when it comes to Kona. It wreaks havoc on our physiology and ultimately our ability to be able to produce a performance that we want to. So that's the obvious one. All right, so now we've discussed heat and humidity. The second part to that, and probably the more important part, is what did you do in preparation to prepare for that heat and humidity? Did you go over and get there early? I mean, you look at the pros, they get there a month, maybe even a month and a half before Kona, really prioritize acclimatization to the environment. That's getting in, being in and amongst that heat and humidity for an exposed period of time, having the time to have those physiological adaptations change as a result, which means you're going to be able to tolerate and manage that heat load and humidity stress a little bit better when it comes to racing. For the amateur, it may not be that practical, but we know through some of the research that it only takes about 4 to 6 days on average to get about 85% of those positive adaptations. And those positive adaptations are positive impacts on heart rate. So our heart rate's not going to increase as much or drift as much. We have increases in sweat rate to aid that cooling process. Increases in plasma volume, so we're able to retain a bit more fluid to allow that cooling process to happen. And things like reduction of RPE. you feel more comfortable in that environment, has a big impact on how you actually go. Now, if that's not completely practical, or you're a little bit worried about, is that enough time? Am I going to still struggle? Because 4 days doesn't sound like a lot. 6 days doesn't sound like a lot to be able to really adapt. And at the end of the day, you're in the middle of your taper as well. So how much training am I going to do in that environment? You can simulate this, and that's where acclimation comes in. Slightly different term, but what it means is simulating the environment. So that might be going and finding a university or a setup that allows you to do some heat training in a very fancy heat chamber. Or on a really basic level, I recommend this as a really practical solution to athletes who have gone and raced in hot conditions. Go and set your trainer up in your bathroom, turn the heaters on, shut the door, get the shower going for a little bit to build a bit of humidity, and you can get reasonably close. It's a bit of a backyard lab type setup in terms of simulating some heat and humidity, but it does a reasonable job, particularly on the side of perceived exertion, getting you used to the sensation of being hot, being in a humid environment. You may then want to chuck on some extra layers to get that core body temperature up. We're just trying to simulate ways that we can get prepared for that exposure to a hotter climate or hotter environment if we're unable to get it elsewhere. It may not be as optimal as getting over there and being in the actual environment, but it's a pretty handy, easy way to be able to get some adaptations. So we're not going to get absolutely run over by the heat and humidity when we do get over to Kona and then ultimately we go and race. So your preparation for the heat and humidity is probably more important, or equally important at least, as how you manage it within the race in terms of cooling yourself down. It's if you prepare really well, like you do for your swim, bike and run, we're going to go and prepare really well for those so we can complete the event in the first place. We prepare well for the heat, that's where the event is going to start to come together a little bit more effectively for us. So another factor to consider is the travel component. For a lot of amateur athletes, you may not be as accustomed to traveling internationally or a long distance for a race like Hawaii. From wherever you are in the world, except for probably the US, it's going to take you multiple hours, if not day and a half, to really get yourself all the way over there, ready to go, settled in. So what I always recommend is making sure that we try to maximize our recovery and our sleep as best we can. And part of that process is adjusting our body clock appropriately, making sure that we get onto local time. And when I say local time, Hawaii time, as quickly as we can. A strategy that I used when I went over, and I've been over to the US a few times, is when I go over there coming from Australia, we cross the date line and sort of feel like you time travel backwards. That's a really difficult thing to manage. As soon as I get into the US, try to keep myself up as much as I can throughout the day, which then allows me to get onto local time a little bit more effectively. And then you want to try and get yourself to sleep as you would normally at night, but just in that local time zone. The quicker you can adjust and the earlier you start preparing that, day before you fly, as you fly, when you're in the air, things like that, the better you can do that and adjust, the easier it is for you to then get some really good sleep and recovery, which is really, really important in those last days or weeks when you get over there in terms of our taper and making sure we can then be physiologically ready to race our best. So the travel aspect is really, really important. The other thing I also recommend is try to eliminate as much of the stress as you can. Make sure you get over there nice and early. Like I said, there's some positives in terms of physiological adaptation. 4 to 6 days early, it's going to give us a great amount of physiological adaptation to the environment. But it also means you get your bike over there. It's not stuck somewhere in an airport. I know there was issues this year with getting bikes out post-Kona, but it's the type of thing you want to eliminate as much of that stress as you can, because the psychological factors of Kona itself are probably the last thing we're going to touch on here, but they can be a really, really big thing. And if we add any further stress to that from a travel side of things, if you're not prepared, that's where it's going to catch up with you. So from a travel side, be prepared, plan ahead, try and get on that time zone early, but avoid as much stress as possible, because these psychological factors are also going to play a big part when it comes to racing at the Big Island. So now we come to our last point, which is the psychological side of things. Obviously the lead up, the preparation, it's built up as the biggest and the most difficult course. That already sets your mind to think this is going to be hard, but also that also puts a lot of expectation on. And if we look at that from a professional athlete perspective, I think of someone like Christian Blumenfeld. He was the outright favourite. A lot of pressure on these professional athletes to perform, because this is the World Championships. This is the big event. This is their grand final, their Super Bowl, whatever you want to make the analogy to. They need to go and perform, because there's ramifications for them in terms of sponsorship, in terms of prize money. Like, all of these things come as a result of them doing really, really well at Kona. For the amateur athlete, you might have the goal of trying to win your age group or be a genuine world champ in your age group, whatever it might be. But ultimately, the bigger things that sort of feed into it and what causes some of these athletes to break is not necessarily the pressure and expectation of a performance per se, but it's the build-up and the aura around the event. I mean, ultimately it is a world championship, so going to that is quite exciting for a lot of people, and that can wear you down in the lead up to the event, getting caught up in too much of the emotion of it, getting too much emotional energy invested into it before race day. That can be a difficult thing to balance if you haven't experienced it before. But then something as simple as how isolating and barren the course is at the back end. Front end of the course where transition is, it's vibrant, it's loud, there's a lot of people around, a lot of things happening. It's easy to get really stimulated by that environment to keep pushing you along and keep you going. I just think about coming out of transition on the bike and going over there as a spectator a number of years ago now, experiencing and observing this, coming out through that section. It's loud, there's a lot of people around all through the day, there's people and there's things going on. You get out to the back end of the course and you go down the highway, head past the airport. It's just barren lava field. I mean, from a stimulus perspective and trying to keep you engaged in what's going on, you can understand why that would break a number of athletes. It's hot, it's humid, this is getting hard, and I'm just looking at black rock as far as I can see and riding through nothing, and I can't hear anyone, and there might be occasionally a motorbike or another cyclist that goes past me. Heading out on the back end of the run course, it's the same thing. You go through the same section. You go out to where the energy lab is. It's not really that exciting. It's just kind of like an industrial estate. And I don't want to take the aura out of the event because it's still a fantastic event. I think it's a really incredible location for it. But this is what makes it so hard, is that it gets built up as this amazing place and things like that, which it absolutely is. But at the same time, in the background, it's this absolutely brutal environment. It's not very exciting or bright. It's not like you're Bustleton, for example. You're running down the beach. You can see the water. There's some greenery around. It's nice. There's people around it all over the course. This is just rock, lava field, heading out the back. There's a handful of people scattered across different parts of the course, but in some circumstances, it feels like you're kind of in the middle of nowhere on this giant volcano, which is the island of Kona. So it can break you really quickly. If things are going wrong physiologically and your body's telling you this is hard, I'm struggling here, I'm hot, my heart rate's high, I'm starting to slow down, I'm running out of fuel, getting dehydrated, all of these things, plus the fact that there's nothing there to stimulate you, engage you. If you don't have strategies to overcome that, like maybe it's singing songs in your head. I know a lot of athletes will do that. Maybe it's counting the cyclists that you go past on the other side of the road, or in your mind calling out the color of their tri-suits. Anything that can keep you engaged in the moment, so to speak, and really engaged in what you're doing and enjoying what you're doing is going to be really beneficial to prevent any negative from being overwhelmed by how difficult that course can actually be. So all in all, they're the factors that I think really break an athlete at Kona. It comes down to the heat and humidity, your ability to prepare for that heat and humidity and tolerate it at the time. Those two are really, really incredibly critical to having a great day, is managing your heat load stress. The travel side of things can be stressful for a number of people, and it can be something that can take a bit of getting used to. So using some of those strategies to get ahead of the game with things like time zone changes and that can make a world of difference. But then also the psychology of it. At the end of the day, it is an Ironman World Championship, so there is going to be some expectation. There's going to be some excitement, some emotional energy invested before the race even begins. Having a good balance there, but then also having the strategies for when it does get hard. If you start buying into the negatives, that's where your race can really So that's all the factors that I believe and I observe being the key contributors to breaking athletes at Kona. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments down below. What do you think is maybe in addition to these? Have you experienced Kona and agree with some of these points? Are there some things that you did to overcome them? Always happy to hear your discussion points down below. Let me know your questions, whatever it might be. Again, really appreciate you supporting this channel. Really enjoy making these videos, breaking down events like Kona for you. Let me know if there's another event you'd want me to chat about here on the channel or a future video. But otherwise, I'm going to leave it there for today, and we'll see you in the next one.